Hello, my name is Vera. My sister used to mock me for not having a job. At every dinner, every chance she got. What no one knew was, I had quietly built the company she worked for. And when I found out she used my own ideas to climb the ladder, I didn't yell. I fired her. But that's not even the worst part. The real betrayal? It started long before that, with a forged deed, a stolen identity, and a lie so deep it nearly erased me. Why did my own family try to shut me out of everything I built? They say brunch is the new Sunday church. At least, that's how Delaney treats it. Every weekend, like clockwork, she books the most polished table at the Mulberry Inn. White linen napkins, lemon-infused water, waiters who know her name. And I go along, every time, like a ghost dragging herself into someone else's celebration. That morning, I sat quietly at the far end of the table, nursing a lukewarm cappuccino I hadn't asked for. Delaney and her corporate crowd, sharp suits and sharper tongues, were already deep into stories about their latest wins, client deals, weekend escapes, six-figure bonuses. I smiled when appropriate, nodded when expected, and stayed invisible. It was Kyle, her favorite lapdog, who finally turned to me. "So, Vera, what are you working on these days?" I opened my mouth, only to be cut off by Delaney's voice, coated in syrup and acid. "She's doing what she does best, waiting." A second of silence, then laughter. Loud, knowing, gut-punching laughter. My stomach clenched, but I didn't flinch, not on the outside. I looked down, stirred my cappuccino like it mattered. I could feel their eyes bounce off me like I was a decorative plant someone forgot to water. "She's just being modest," Kyle added with a smug grin. "Vera's a free spirit, right?" I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and forced a smile. "I'm building something, on my own," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "Ah, so no steady income," another voice chimed in. Maybe Heather, maybe someone else. It didn't matter, they all sounded the same. Delaney took a sip of her mimosa like she'd just dropped the mic, and no one corrected her. I waited for someone, anyone, to say something. My mother-in-law sat 2 seats down. She reached for the fruit tray, changed the topic to local property taxes, and pretended I didn't exist. I excused myself after 15 more minutes of playing along. I told them I had a headache. The truth? My dignity was cracking, and I needed to leave before it shattered completely. The parking lot outside felt like a different world. Quiet, gray, indifferent. I got in my car and just sat there for a moment. The hum of the engine matched the buzzing in my ears. The brunch was supposed to last another hour, maybe more. No one texted to check on me. Driving home, I didn't even turn on the radio. My thoughts were loud enough. I used to have dreams, real ones, big ones, a company plan, designs, goals scribbled in notebooks. But dreams die quietly when no one believes in them, not even you. At a red light, I pulled out my phone, opened a resume draft I had been editing for weeks. Every time I looked at it, it felt like I was begging. For a shot. For validation. For someone to care. I hit delete. The green light flashed. I kept driving. Back home, the house greeted me in silence. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to see the space to feel how empty it was. Instead, I sat at the kitchen counter and scrolled through the brunch group chat. A photo popped up, everyone smiling in front of the bar's flower wall. I wasn't in it. No one had asked me to join. And then, just as I was about to close the app, another message appeared, from Delaney. "You know, I carried this family on my back. Some of us have real responsibilities." It wasn't meant just for me, but it hit like a direct shot. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I put my phone down, folded my hands together, and breathed. She'd said what she really thought. And now I had to decide. Would I stay the silent, steady one forever? I didn't reply to her message. I didn't even touch my phone for the rest of the evening. Instead, I poured myself a glass of tap water, turned off the hallway light, and sat in the quiet of my living room. The stillness had a way of pressing on me, like gravity pulling on everything I hadn't said out loud. She carried the family? I carried silence. That had to count for something. The next day, around 5:30, Mom texted me. "Dinner tonight, just the family. Come if you're free." Just the family. That phrase landed oddly. But I went. I always did. And just like always, I arrived 5 minutes early and ended up being the last one seated. Mom's house looked exactly the same as it did when I was 15. Plastic-covered cushions, family portraits from decades ago still hung slightly crooked in the hallway, and the same faint scent of lemon pledge and old paper. Comforting. Familiar. And yet, that night, the air inside felt tight. Delaney had already taken the center seat, naturally. The chair with the best lighting, the closest to the kitchen. She wore a navy blue blazer that probably cost more than my rent, and had the kind of posture you only learn after years of winning arguments you shouldn't have won. I ended up at the far end of the table, between a crooked lampshade and a dusty sideboard. Dinner was a spread of roast chicken, garlic green beans, and mashed potatoes. I spooned a little of everything onto my plate, but didn't eat. Just moved the food around, tried to look engaged. Halfway through the meal, Delaney clinked her fork against her glass. "Can I say something?" I didn't look up. I already knew it wouldn't be good. "I just want to say," she began, standing for emphasis, "that I'm proud of how far we've come. Some of us have made sacrifices others don't even see." She gestured around the table like she was giving a TED Talk. "I paid off Mom's surgery bills. I kept this house from foreclosure. And I made sure everyone had what they needed, no matter what it cost me." Mom gave a faint nod and patted Delaney's hand. I stared at the gravy bleeding into my potatoes. No one said anything, not my uncle, not my cousin Matthew, who was already 3 beers in, not even Mom. It was as if they were all watching a performance and didn't want to interrupt the show. Delaney sat back down, adjusted her napkin, and smiled, like she had just accepted an award. I didn't speak. There was no space for my voice at that table, and I wasn't going to fight for scraps anymore. After dinner, I drove home under a sky smeared with clouds. The air was heavy with the scent of early spring, wet grass, pavement just beginning to cool from the day's warmth. Once inside, I kicked off my shoes, tossed my keys on the counter, and collapsed on the couch. The silence wasn't peaceful this time. It buzzed. Out of habit, I opened the family group chat, scrolled past memes, grocery deals, and blurry photos of someone's new puppy. Then a video started playing, auto-played without sound at first. The thumbnail froze on Delaney's face. She was holding a champagne flute, cheeks flushed, clearly mid-toast. I tapped to unmute. "Vera!" she laughed, eyes squinting. "You mean our family's pity case? Every family's got one." A burst of laughter followed. People I didn't recognize, co-workers maybe, colleagues who only knew me through her twisted lens. One woman asked, "Wait, she's your sister?" Delaney rolled her eyes, then sipped her drink. "Only technically." I didn't move, didn't breathe. I let the video play twice, then a third time. Each viewing hit differently. Anger, shame, then something else, something steelier. I downloaded the video, then deleted it from the chat. It wasn't about proving her wrong, not yet. It was about not letting her control the story anymore. Later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush still in hand, not moving. "She thinks I'm disposable," I whispered. My reflection didn't argue. I thought back to college, when professors praised my projects, when I stayed up designing mock-ups, when I once pitched a startup idea that got attention from a local tech incubator. I used to believe I mattered. I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out a worn, spiral-bound notebook. "Let them underestimate you," was scribbled across the cover. Inside, on the next clean page, I wrote 2 names. People from the video. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but they mattered now. I flipped back to the cover and pressed the notebook shut. Then I went back to the group chat, curious. The video had dozens of reactions, hearts, laughing faces, a few inside jokes, but one comment stood out. She still thinks she owns something. Cute. I stared at it. And without smiling, I whispered, "We'll see." The next morning, I stood at the kitchen counter, slowly slicing a pear. Not for breakfast, just something to do with my hands. The notebook lay nearby, closed, but humming with new purpose. I could still hear that video in my head, each laugh like a nail being tapped in deeper. I had no plan. Not yet. But I wasn't waiting around to be pitied anymore. By late afternoon, I'd convinced myself it was just a regular errand run. I packed a tote with some soup, Tylenol, a box of herbal tea, and a sleeve of shortbread cookies, my mom's favorite. It wasn't out of the ordinary. She hadn't been feeling great lately, and I used to drop things off when I could. Only this time, I needed something too. A conversation. The drive across town was quiet. The sky turning silver, threatening rain, but never delivering. Her house sat tucked behind a line of maple trees, the same ones Delaney and I used to rake leaves under every fall. I parked at the curb and walked up the cracked path, balancing the grocery bag on one hip. She opened the door with a surprised smile. "You didn't text." "I figured I'd stop by, just for a bit." She stepped aside, and I followed the scent of lavender cleaner into the kitchen. Everything was in its place. Everything always was. I set the bag down on the counter. "This is for you. Some things you like. I thought you might be out of tea." She smiled, almost tender. "Thank you, sweetheart." We sat at the table. She poured us both a glass of water. We didn't speak much, but eventually I cleared my throat and said, "I wanted to talk to you about dinner the other night." Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders tightened. I went on. "What Delaney said, it hurt, a lot." And no one said anything. She kept her eyes on the rim of her glass. "She didn't mean it that way." I gave a short breath through my nose. "She said she carried the family, that she saved everyone, like I've never done a thing in my life that mattered." "You're the baby," she said, like that explained it all. "You've always had less weight to carry. That's not her fault." I blinked. "So, she gets to mock me, and I'm supposed to thank her for it?" Mom didn't look at me when she replied. "Sometimes the youngest needs to learn when to be quiet." The words settled like concrete inside my chest. Not shouted, not cruel, just carved from years of quiet bias, the kind that molds everything you believe about yourself. I nodded slowly and stood. "Okay." "I didn't mean it like," she started, but I was already picking up my tote. "It's fine," I said gently. "I should go." The ride back home felt longer, though I took the same route. No music this time. I couldn't bear even a single note. Once home, I sat at my desk and opened the bottom drawer. I hadn't touched it in years. It smelled like dust and something faintly acidic, old glue or dried-out pens. I reached in and pulled out a plastic baggie. Inside, a pale blue ribbon folded unevenly. Science fair. 9th grade. I remembered everything. Staying after school, building the model volcano by myself. Delaney had promised she'd show up. She never did. Mom called that night to say work ran late. I stood outside the gym with that ribbon in my hand, the crowd thinning. No one came. One of the judges had said, "You've got something. You're the one with the spark." But no one at home ever heard those words. Now the ribbon looked faded, its edges frayed. I could have thrown it out. But instead, I slipped it into a folder marked Proof of Me. Inside were old report cards, a few letters of recommendation, and a photo of me giving a talk during senior year of college. I closed the folder and held it for a while. Later that evening, after I changed into sweats and made a cup of ginger tea, I pulled my old laptop out from the hall closet. It still worked, miraculously. I plugged in an old USB backup and waited. Click by click, images unfolded. My senior thesis portfolio, branding projects, user flow mock-ups I'd once been so proud of. Somewhere inside this mess was the version of me I had put on hold. For family, for peace, for nothing. I opened a new tab and searched for local accelerator programs. Found one with an open application window. The form was straightforward. They didn't ask for pedigree or referrals, just vision. I filled in the basics, then paused. It asked for a business name. I didn't have one. Yet. So I saved the draft and closed the laptop. It wasn't about winning a grant or proving a point. Not really. It was about giving myself permission to remember who I was before I started believing them. The house was quiet, lights low. I leaned back on the couch, knees pulled up, arms around them. I'd spent most of my life waiting to be seen, to be picked, to be loved the way I loved. But that night, I finally stopped waiting for them to see me. I started learning how to see myself again. The next morning, I made a list. Groceries, laundry, sort through old receipts, check mortgage renewal notice. I didn't think twice when I clicked the email from the mortgage company. It was just a standard reminder. But something about the wording felt off. It mentioned an ownership update and gave me a link to view the most recent title information. I clicked. The page loaded slowly, like it knew what it was about to do to me. And then, there it was. Delaney Monroe, under legal title holder. I blinked, hit refresh, scanned the document again. Delaney's name, not mine. I stared at the screen for several minutes, barely breathing. My stomach clenched in that slow, spreading way that usually comes just before bad news. But this wasn't new. This was something old, something that had been sitting there quietly for years, like mold under wallpaper. I remembered the down payment. That check I wrote with my own hand, from the inheritance Aunt Julia left me. I remembered going to the notary. I remembered Delaney tagging along because she had more experience with paperwork. I remembered signing something, but I was rushing, trusting. She said it was just for convenience, just to help with the bank process. Now her name was on the deed. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the third ring, breathless. "Oh, honey, everything okay?" "Mom, do you remember when I bought the house? Why is Delaney listed as the owner?" There was a pause. Then, that familiar rustling sound of her settling into her chair. "Oh, well, she handled all the forms, right? She said she'd keep things organized for you. You didn't want to deal with all the back and forth." I swallowed hard. "You knew?" "I just assumed you both agreed to it. Delaney's always been so responsible." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? "She's looked out for you, Vera. I hope you remember that. Looked out for me, like a wolf looks out for sheep." I ended the call politely, then sat still for a long while. The hum of the refrigerator, the only noise in the kitchen. Later that week, I got a message from an old colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. He said there was a local recognition ceremony happening, one of those tech community events where startups and companies gave lightning talks and awards were handed out. "Thought you might want to attend," he said. "Your sister's on the program." I hesitated, then RSVP'd yes. The event took place in a renovated warehouse with exposed brick walls and cold brew stations at every corner. I arrived early, took a seat in the back, stayed silent. When Delaney stepped onto the stage, the audience applauded like she was royalty. She wore that sharp navy suit I helped her pick out during a sale at Nordstrom Rack 3 years ago. She smiled, adjusted the mic, and began. "We built this with vision, persistence, and resilience. Our latest accessibility suite comes from a commitment to empowering every user, regardless of ability." My hands went cold. That phrase, accessibility suite, was mine. It was something I had mapped out on the back of a napkin one summer, during a long rant about how apps ignore seniors with tremors and aging eyes. I'd drawn icons, talked through tap sensitivity. I'd told her about it in her own kitchen, over coffee. She nodded, listened, even said it was smart thinking. And now it was her award-winning idea. She never mentioned me. The applause thundered again as she took a bow. I stood and left before she could spot me, walked briskly to my car, each footstep harder than the last. Once inside, I didn't cry. I just stared through the windshield as the rain finally arrived and tapped the glass in soft waves. That night, I opened a fresh Google Doc and started writing. Not a journal entry, not a letter, a list, with timestamps, names, screenshots, email threads. Then I opened a new tab and typed, Property Title Dispute, Legal Help, Charlotte, NC. I found her name instantly, Ruthie Baxter. We were college friends. She'd always had a thing for justice, even when it cost her. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but I found her law firm listed with a specialty in property and IP. I sent an email, straightforward. No small talk. She replied within the hour. Vera, hell yes, I'll help you. Let's talk tomorrow. And we did. We met the next afternoon at a small cafe just off Tryon Street. She wore a trench coat and carried a binder the size of a small toddler. Okay, she said, flipping it open. I pulled the public record already. Your name isn't anywhere on it. But if we can prove misrepresentation or signature coercion, there's a shot. You signed anything under false pretenses? Yes, I trusted her. That's not legally binding, Ruthie said with a bitter smile. But it's a good start. We spent the next hour going over everything I remembered. She asked for any documents I might have kept, any old scans or backups. At one point, she looked up and said, If Delaney really forged this, we'll make sure she regrets ever touching your name. I nodded. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't notice. It was the first time in a long while I didn't feel alone. Ruthie and I parted ways just before noon. I remember sitting in my car afterward, engine running but unmoving, hands still on the wheel. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was playing defense. Something in me had shifted, and I wasn't sure if it was relief or fuel, but I was ready to do something with it. I drove downtown, not for errands, not for a meeting, just for a cup of coffee at the place Delaney and I used to go before things changed. Maybe part of me wanted to reclaim it, or maybe I was chasing something familiar in a sea of things I no longer recognized. The place hadn't changed much. Same burnt orange cushions, same chalkboard menu that never really got updated. I took my drink to the corner table near the window, the one we used to fight over. Halfway through my latte, I heard two women at the next table talking animatedly. Did you get your invite yet? One asked. For the charity tech thing next Thursday? The other laughed. Girl, I've been pre-registered since March. Delaney Monroe sent mine herself. I didn't move, didn't blink. Delaney. Charity tech event. Next Thursday. That was my event. I'd co-founded that series 3 years ago. I'd built the deck, pitched the first sponsors, even helped write the bylaws when we moved it under the holding company. My name was on the first 5 programs. And now I was learning about it from strangers in a coffee shop. I pulled out my phone, searched for the event website. There it was. Polished, full color, stacked with names I recognized. And not mine. Not even as a guest. I called the venue directly, giving a fake name at first, just to get through. Then I switched to my real one. Hi, this is Vera Monroe. I'm trying to confirm my registration status for the Impact Forward Tech Forum next Thursday. There was a pause. Some clicking. I see the list here, the young man said. You're not listed as an attendee. Maybe check with your company's coordinator? My company is hosting the event. Another silence. He lowered his voice. I was told to list only active stakeholders. That came from upper admin. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the logo on the website, one I had designed during a sleepless night 2 years ago. It wasn't a mistake. They'd erased me on purpose. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop. Exclusion logs. I added the call, the event, the name of the venue contact. I knew it wouldn't matter in court, but it mattered to me. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I applied for a job at my own company. With Ruthie's help, I created a profile under my middle name, Veronica Gray, a fresh Gmail account, an anonymized phone number, and a carefully edited resume. Same qualifications, same years of experience, but none of the baggage of being the founder who walked away. The position? UX strategist, mid-level, nothing fancy. I submitted the application on a Thursday. By Sunday morning, the rejection came through. We appreciate your interest in this position. After review, we believe your experience may not align with our current team dynamic. Thank you for considering us. I opened the PDF rejection note. It was signed by the department head, someone Delaney had gone on a girls' trip with to Cabo last fall. I printed it and filed it under bias employment. I didn't feel rage, not even heartbreak, just confirmation. The rot wasn't just Delaney, it was in the air they all breathed. She'd built an entire ecosystem where I didn't belong, not even anonymously. I opened a blank email draft. 2. Delaney Monroe, subject, forum registration. Delaney, I noticed I wasn't included on the forum guest list. I'm sure it was an oversight, but wanted to confirm before the event. Thanks, Vera, I hit send. The response came 12 minutes later. Hi, Vera. We're focusing this year's invitations on current contributors. That said, you're welcome to attend as a guest of the HR department if needed. Best, Delaney. I reread that line 3 times. Guest of the HR department. I highlighted it in red and took a screenshot. Then I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and smiled. Not with joy, but with clarity. Good. That's on record now. They'd forgotten the difference between silence and absence. I wasn't gone. I was gathering. I closed my laptop, made myself a cup of tea, and scribbled another note into my legal pad. Next time they see me, I won't need a ticket. Because I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was baiting them. And they were walking right in. The sun hadn't risen yet when Ruthie called. Her voice buzzed with urgency. Not panic, but that quiet hum of adrenaline people get when they've just seen something they can't ignore. I have it, she said. An hour later, we met in the dim back corner of a diner on the edge of Matthews. She slid a manila folder across the table like we were trading secrets in a Cold War movie. Inside were photocopies of share transfer documents that bore my name, my old signature, and a notary stamp dated 6 years ago. But here's the thing, I never signed those forms. That isn't my signature, I whispered, flipping the pages. It's close, Ruthie replied. But look, see the loop in the M? That's your style now. But this matches the one from your first apartment lease. She duplicated your early signature. I stared at the curve of ink on the page, trying to remember when I'd last used that version of my name. College, maybe. Maybe earlier. She must have scanned an old co-signed doc, Ruthie added. A joint agreement, probably. She layered it over new language. She played the long game, I said. The words fell out of my mouth flat, but they hit like bricks inside my chest. Ruthie looked at me squarely. We can argue forgery, we can argue coercion, and I've already started drafting a statement of claim. But Vera, you need to be ready. This is war. I nodded once. I didn't flinch. I didn't fidget. I just took a sip of my coffee and felt the bitterness settle into my bones. That bitter was mine now. It would keep me upright. Later that evening, I got home and found something new waiting for me. A manila envelope was taped to my door. I knew before I opened it. I knew by the weight of the paper, by the sharp corners, by the familiar tightness in my jaw. The universe didn't even try to be clever anymore. Inside, a formal notice to vacate. 30 days, signed by the legal property owner, Delaney. The stated reason? Failure to contribute meaningfully to household expenses. I laughed. Not a full laugh. More like air punching through clenched teeth. For 10 years I'd paid that mortgage. Every month. No missed payments. My name wasn't on the deed, but my hands had scrubbed every baseboard, patched every leak. I'd painted that bathroom lavender myself the year after Dad died. Now I was being tossed out like clutter from a garage. I walked through each room, lights off. Touched the edge of the windowsill I'd sanded down myself. Sat on the floor of the kitchen where I'd once spilled wine, and cried for hours after my first failed product launch. I touched each place I'd poured love into, not just time. Then I stood in the middle of the living room, hands on hips, and whispered to no one, "You think this will break me?" I packed a single duffel bag, one change of clothes, my laptop, the notebook that had grown heavier by the week, and the printout of the eviction notice. The rest? I didn't need it. Let it rot or burn. I'd done a full reset before. I knew how to start with nothing. As the clock struck midnight, I drove to Ruthie's apartment and handed her the folder. She read it again, lips pursed. "We move now," I said. She nodded. "I'll send it to Bryce, IP and real estate litigator. He's discreet." We stayed up till 3 filing affidavits, notarizing statements, backing up timestamps and call logs. I opened a new LLC account under a fresh name, one Delaney wouldn't recognize. I made sure it couldn't be traced. Then I sent 3 emails. First, to the board chair of my original company. Second, to the HR compliance officer. Third, to the brand's public email account for internal submissions. Each message said the same thing, with minor variations. In light of recent documentation and legal findings, I am formally requesting an internal audit and ownership review of all founder equity and stakeholder arrangements. I didn't sign it "warm regards," just Vera Monroe. Short, legal, direct. The final act of the night was uploading everything into a locked Google Drive folder titled, "In Case They Try Again." And they would. But this time, I'd meet them at the door. This time, I wasn't whispering. I was recording. I barely slept the night before. Not from nerves, but from purpose. There's a strange kind of energy that takes over when you finally decide you're done being polite about your own erasure. At 6:15 a.m., I zipped my overnight bag, adjusted the collar of my navy blazer, and slipped on the same pair of low black heels I wore the day I pitched my first startup. My hair was tied back, not stiff, not dramatic, just clean, intentional. Like everything else that morning, the drive to the office was quiet. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of early traffic and the steady rhythm of my own breath. When I pulled into the underground lot, I saw unfamiliar cars in the reserved spots, new names on the brass placards by the elevators, but mine still hung there, faint but etched. Reserved, V. Monroe. No one had scraped it off. I stepped out, walked through the private lobby entrance, and scanned my temporary badge. The security guard glanced up, startled, but said nothing. I didn't give him a reason to. Upstairs, the glass doors to the executive floor were already propped open. The receptionist, early 20s, headset slightly crooked, looked up from her screen. "Are you Ms. Chin?" she asked, eyes scanning her log. "No," I replied with a calm smile, "but you'll want to mark me down as present." I didn't wait for her response. My heels echoed across the marble tile as I walked down the corridor, past framed photos of product launches I'd spearheaded but had long since been cropped out of. At the end of the hall was the conference room. Inside, the board was gathering. 12 men and women in tailored suits, seated at a long walnut table. Bottled water, tablets, neatly folded meeting agendas. And at the front, standing confidently with a laser pointer in hand, was Delaney. She was mid-sentence, describing the foundational design evolution of our flagship product, when she looked up and saw me in the doorway. Her mouth froze mid-word. The color drained slightly from her cheeks. She didn't stop talking, just stammered, then switched the slide quickly. The next image flashed onto the screen, a timeline of the company's brand identity over the years. In the center, larger than the rest, was a graphic I had designed on my second-hand laptop in a cramped studio apartment over a decade ago. She didn't credit me. She didn't have to. I recognized the color code I created, the angled font I'd spent nights refining, the tagline I once scribbled on a sticky note during a coffee-fueled brainstorm. "Access isn't an option, it's a promise." I stepped inside uninvited and walked toward the head of the table. Not rushing, not asking. Delaney's voice faltered. No one else spoke. I set my leather folder on the table, opened it, and placed my credentials beside it. My newly reinstated badge from Reynolds Holdings. CEO, Vera Monroe. Then I turned to the board. I believe you're discussing my work. Please don't let me interrupt. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Delaney cleared her throat and tried to resume, flipping to the next slide. Another of my designs. Another quote pulled from my private notes. Resilience isn't built, it's remembered, she read aloud, as if the words had always belonged to her. I didn't speak. I opened my laptop instead. One click, and the projection screen behind her changed. On it, a series of folders, each named, time-stamped, documented. Initial draft files, I said calmly. Original design metadata, copyright filings, patent abstracts. Then I clicked again, revealing emails from years ago. I had sent her the files during our late-night collaboration sessions. I had trusted her then. She had built her reputation on them since. Delaney's face hardened. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but I raised a hand. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm not here to take back what can't be undone. I closed the laptop and looked around the room. But I want the record to be corrected, and moving forward, you will cite authorship accurately. You will not erase me. A board member finally spoke. Ms. Monroe, would you consider returning formally? I didn't answer right away. I turned to Delaney instead and leaned in close. I'm not here to ruin you, I said, barely above a whisper. I'm here to remind you whose name you erased. Then I walked out. I didn't need applause. I didn't need permission. I'd already reclaimed everything that mattered. I left the boardroom and headed for the empty lounge one floor below. The silence there was thicker, uninterrupted by the shuffle of assistants or the soft hum of screensavers. I sat alone with a cup of stale coffee and my folder still warm from the laptop. I didn't sip the coffee. I wasn't thirsty. I was waiting. 10 minutes later, Ruthie joined me. She didn't sit at first, just stood beside the chair, watching me carefully. Then she reached into her bag and slid an email across the table. Thought you'd want to see this before we go back up, she said. The subject line was sharp. Internal HR brief, Monroe situation. The body? A message Delaney had written nearly a year ago. Vera hasn't contributed in any meaningful way in years. She's been living off old equity and emotional guilt. Frankly, she's our family's freeloader. There was more, but I stopped reading. My chest didn't tighten the way it used to. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I reached into my folder and pulled out the bank wire confirmation. $62,500. 3 years ago. To cover a sudden liquidity crisis Delaney had during her ill-fated boutique expansion. She'd said it was temporary. She'd never mentioned it again. I placed the receipt next to the email and looked up at Ruthie. Are you going to tell them? She asked. I folded the email neatly and tucked it behind the receipt. No, I said. I'm going to show them. The final board session started at 1. This time, I didn't wait in the hallway. I entered first, stood by the projection screen, and opened my folder without saying a word. The board members arrived one by one. Some nodded. Others kept their heads down. Delaney was the last to walk in. She looked calm, but her eyes scanned the room like a woman checking exits. She took her seat across from me and crossed her legs, too casually. I'll make this brief, I began, my voice steady. There have been questions about authorship, about responsibility, about truth. I clicked the first slide. A scan of the forged signature on the equity transfer form. Then, a comparison with my real signature from verified documents. Ruthie stood nearby, confirming each entry. Then I moved to the next slide. Photos of brand material time-stamped years before Delaney ever stepped foot in a pitch meeting. After that came the emails, forwarded copies of messages she'd edited and resent under her name. But I saved the best for last. I pulled up the email Ruthie had just shown me. Then, without fanfare, I placed the wire receipt on the conference table and pushed it toward the center. She said I was mooching, I said quietly. But this was my savings. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't even ask for thanks. I did it because she was drowning, and I didn't want her to drown. Delaney let out a shaky breath. That's a personal matter, she tried to say, but her voice cracked. No, I cut in. It's a pattern. Because this is what you do, Delaney. You turn kindness into currency, and when it no longer serves you, you rewrite the past. I paused, looked around the room. No one met my eyes. You used my name. You used my work. You told a version of this story where you were the savior and I was the burden. I pulled a set of printed letters from my folder, signed, dated, reviewed by our legal team. These are the terminations, I said, effective immediately, for breach of ethical conduct, misrepresentation of IP, and falsifying internal records. I slid the letters across the table to Delaney and her two closest allies, former roommates, now heads of departments that had once blocked my applications. One board member cleared his throat. Do we need a formal vote? Another responded, No, it's clear. Delaney looked up at me, her voice cracking. You can't just throw me away. We're blood. I nodded slowly. Exactly. And that's why this hurts more than it should. But I'm done sacrificing myself on the altar of family. She stood up. You think you're better than me now? No, I said. I always was. You just convinced me not to believe it. Security entered quietly. Delaney's allies stood as well, deflated and speechless. No shouting, no final insults. Just 3 people who had finally run out of lies. As they were escorted from the room, one reporter from the internal comms team snapped a photo. The click of the camera echoed like a gavel. When the room cleared, I stayed behind. The sun streamed in through the tall windows, casting a quiet spotlight on the head of the table. I walked over, ran my fingers across the etched glass nameplate. Vera Monroe, CEO. For the first time, it wasn't taped, wasn't borrowed. It was mine. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. I didn't want applause. I just wanted my name back. The next morning, I arrived at the office long before anyone else. The air was still, almost reverent, as if the walls themselves were catching their breath after the storm that passed. My heels echoed softly as I walked through the polished lobby. My reflection caught in the glass, a quieter version of the woman who stood here years ago. She was younger, hungrier, but she had no idea how much she'd need to lose before she could reclaim herself. When I reached the top floor, the receptionist glanced up and offered a cautious smile. Ms. Monroe, she said, her voice nearly a whisper. I nodded gently, not correcting her tone or cadence. It would take time, and I was in no rush. My office, yes, mine, was exactly as it had been left the evening before, but the sunlight painted it in a warmer shade this time. It poured across the desk, hitting the nameplate square in the center like a spotlight. Vera Monroe. Etched, permanent, no longer borrowed. On the shelf behind me was a framed photo, not of me or Delaney, but of our original team, back when we sat in a garage with whiteboards and Post-its and dreams too big for our zip code. I reached out and turned the frame slightly, so it faced the room. Moments later, Ruthie entered without knocking, a folder in one hand and a paper cup in the other. Press wants a quote, she said. The board just finalized a release. I took the paper from her and scanned the headline. Reynolds Holdings welcomes back founder. New era begins. I folded the page in half and set it aside. It was never about the press. Ruthie smiled, not pushing further. She placed the coffee down and leaned against the wall. You ever gonna go back to the house? I shook my head once. Too many ghosts in those walls, and not the kind you can clean out with bleach. Neither of us said anything for a while. The quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Later that afternoon, I checked my voicemail, though I already knew I shouldn't have. Sure enough, one new message. Delaney. Her voice was calm, too calm. You left me no choice, she said. You made me feel small, What else was I supposed to do? I didn't finish the message. I didn't need to. The absence of remorse stung deeper than any insult ever could. She hadn't learned. She hadn't broken. She'd just reshaped the lie in a new container. But that was no longer my burden to carry. I deleted it and placed my phone face down on the desk. That evening, I passed a junior designer in the hallway. She looked maybe 24, still gripping a sketch pad like it was armor. She stopped me shyly. "Ma'am?" she said, then faltered. "I just wanted to thank you for what you said in the town hall last month about making space." I offered a small smile. "You don't have to earn space," I told her. "You just have to claim it." She blinked, surprised, then nodded and walked on. Back in my office, I opened a long-forgotten drawer and found an old sketch, a logo I'd drafted in the early days. Delaney once said it was too subtle to be memorable. I pinned it on the corkboard beside my desk. "Subtle," I murmured, "is sometimes the loudest thing in the room." Before closing up for the night, I received a ping from Ruthie. "You might want to see this," the text read, a link to a podcast. Delaney's voice came through before I even clicked play. "I was misunderstood. I was doing what I thought was best for the company and our family." I paused it halfway through. I didn't need to hear the ending. Ruthie appeared in my doorway just as I closed the browser. "You're not going to respond?" she asked, arms folded. "No," I said. "Some people need the last word. I don't." The following week, I walked into the company's all-hands town hall. This time not as a ghost, not as a legend others whispered about, but as a leader who had earned every scar. There was no fanfare, no dramatic music, just a quiet stillness before I spoke. "If you ever feel like no one sees you," I said, "just remember, not being seen doesn't mean you don't matter. It just means it's not your time yet." The applause came like a wave, warm, honest, real, but I didn't let it linger too long. I nodded, stepped back, and let the next voice take the floor. I hadn't come back to be worshipped. I came back to end a chapter, and begin one that finally belonged to me. There's something about silence that teaches you more than applause ever could. For so long, I confused being quiet with being weak. But strength doesn't always look like shouting. It can look like standing your ground when the world wants to erase you. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need anyone's approval to reclaim your name, your worth, or your story. Whether it's family, work, or life itself, don't wait to be invited. Build your own door, walk through it, and close it behind you if you must. I know I'm not the only one who's felt overlooked or underestimated. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Have you ever had to fight quietly for something that was already yours? If this story spoke to you, even a little, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me what city or state you're watching from. And if it didn't hit home, that's okay too. Let me know why and how I can do better next time. If you found something in this video that made you feel seen, inspired, or even a little stronger, please hit that subscribe button. We've got more real stories to share. Stories that heal. Stories that empower. Thanks for walking through this chapter with me. And remember, just because they tried to erase you doesn't mean you disappeared.